This is the story of children, of Aram, Hanya, Basha, and Wafa, and tens of thousands more. Like you children in mine, they are beautiful and special. They smile at us with trusting eyes, eager to know all the world has to offer. This is the story of children in war, children brutalized by disease and without medicine, children hungry and without food. These are the children of Iraq, the ancient land of Mesopotamia, bounded by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and first settled in the 7th millennium before Christ. Historically, the world regards this region as the cradle of civilization, a fact American children learn in elementary school. How did such a tragedy befall these children? What can be done to save those who are still alive and ensure that this will never happen to a single child again? Night after night during the Persian Gulf War, the pictures on our television screens showed a series of aerial targets and subsequent bombings as remote and unreal as the Baghdad we remembered from childhood tales of Arabian Nights. President Bush declared, "We were attacking only military installations, nuclear weapons facilities, airfields, missile launching sites, oil refineries, and chemical weapons plants. Our smart bombs were to end the war with very little loss of life." The bombardment of Iraq continued from January 16th to the ceasefire on February 27, 1991. 42 consecutive days of bombing. There were 116,000 sorties flown. There were 142,000 tons of bombs dropped on Iraq. In June of 1991, a group of American academic physicians traveled to Iraq to assess the ability of the Iraqi healthcare system to cope with the medical crisis in the aftermath of the Gulf War. The mission was coordinated by Medicine for Peace, a humanitarian organization concerned with the health care of the poor. Dr. Michael Viola, professor of medicine at the State University of New York at Stony Brook, is co-director of Medicine for Peace.
In early February, after 15,000 bombing raids against densely populated areas, he became very worried about the possibility of a large number of civilian casualties.
Your family was hurt? Your father was hurt?
Yes.
Tell me, what happened to your father?
His leg broken and his hand and all face. No face. No. His lips and nose, everything. His eyes.
From the fire?
From the fire.
Medicine for Peace received information from a team of Jordanian physicians that electrical power to hospitals in Iraq had been terminated. We envisioned hospitals without emergency rooms or intensive care units, premature infants in unheated incubators, operating rooms in darkness. 18 of the 20 Iraqi power generating plants were destroyed. This is the large power plant at Al-Hatha, outside of Basra. It was bombed on January 17th. And an additional 13 times, including January 28th, the day of the ceasefire. A number of the plants have been repaired since the war using cannibalized parts. However, unless spare parts were available from outside of the country, it is very likely that the whole electrical system will break down again.
The breakup, the total destruction of the electrical power grid in Iraq by Allied bombardment completely put to a halt all of the kinds of things that high-tech dependent society counted on. Being able to flush the toilet, having refrigerators at work, not having streets full of sewage, being able to open a faucet, turn on a faucet, and have clean water.
Disruption of the power system was the first step in the collapse of the physical infrastructure which supports Iraqi civilian life. Prior to the war, Iraq provided clean drinking water to 90% of its population. This was a sophisticated facility which took water from the Tigris River and provided clean water for the citizens of Baghdad. During the war, this plant was bombed and completely destroyed. None of the surrounding structures were targeted. At the same time that the water purification plants were being hit, pipes and pumping stations, which dispose of sewage, were also damaged by the bombing. Raw sewage backed up into homes, poured onto the streets, and was discharged into the rivers untreated. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the only water source for drinking and cooking, were now contaminated with disease-causing organisms. Unaware of the potential hazards, children here continued to bathe in the polluted Tigris as the only relief from the sweltering heat. Before the war, the vast majority of the Iraqi population had access to a high level of free medical care. Within the past few years, the infant mortality rate had dropped from 80 to 40 deaths per 1,000 births. However, the Medicine for Peace team found the wards of the pediatric hospitals crowded with children seriously ill because of the contaminated water supply. 30 to 40% of the children examined had intractable diarrhea complicated by severe malnutrition. Hanya is a 2.5-year-old child, the youngest of 4 children. Her family is of modest means, living on the outskirts of Baghdad. She developed nausea and vomiting and was brought to a local hospital, but because of the lack of medical supplies, was transferred to the Saddam City Hospital for Pediatrics. For 10 days, she had uncontrollable diarrhea and fever. Hanya lost consciousness, and on the day of this filming, she died. Thousands of Iraqi children are caught in a vicious cycle. Malnourished, they are susceptible to intestinal infection, which causes further dramatic weight loss and inevitably death. The emergency rooms in Iraqi hospitals are overflowing with children who have contracted waterborne infections. Ali remained in this emergency room for 4 days. No beds were available in the hospital, and he expired without proper medical care. Fatima is a 2.5-year-old child who developed fever, a skin rash, and confusion. She was diagnosed as having typhoid fever by her physician, but this diagnosis could not be confirmed because there are no laboratory reagents and most laboratory equipment is in disrepair. Fatima is being treated with fluids and chloramphenicol. Because of the United Nations embargo, the stores of this drug are dangerously low. Poor sanitation conditions and a general deterioration of infant health has resulted in a 3- to 4-fold increase in the numbers of children with meningitis now being seen in clinics. Most children arrive at the hospital in a semi-comatose condition. Spinal needles have also been embargoed by the UN, and physicians are not able to make precise diagnoses. There are not enough antibiotics to treat the close contacts of those children who have contagious forms of bacterial meningitis, so the epidemic proceeds unabated. Basra, a city of 2 million people, endured 8 years of bombardment during the Iran-Iraq War and was the target of heavy Allied bombing during the Gulf War as well. Intensive civil conflict between rebel Shiites and the Ba'athist government troops following the war resulted in further destruction of the city. Dr. Joseph Thomas was a member of 2 humanitarian missions to Iraq since December 1990.
I have seen other hospitals. We have seen hospitals in Basra where out of 700 babies we've seen, half 50% of those who were in the hospital admitted they're malnourished. Malnutrition aggravated by gastroenteritis typhoid, meningitis, hepatitis. 3 out of 10 transfusions having hepatitis. And why? Because they have no kits to screen any donors. Now, one can go on and give you all the statistics, but I think a distinguished colleague of mine one time, and while he was visiting there, if I recall, he said, the hell with statistics. Here we have a catastrophic epidemic before us. Now we are interested in decimal point, how many, what the rates, who's dying. And that's, I think, it's something that one has to look at.
Serious infections are not the only life-threatening problem affecting children in Iraq. Dr. Atiya Til is the chief of cancer treatment at the Saddam City Hospital for Pediatrics in Baghdad. He was trained at the Children's Hospital Center in Washington, D.C., and he is an internationally known expert in the treatment of childhood malignancies. Although the war was not directly responsible for these unfortunate children developing cancer, treatment is now not available in Iraq to either cure their disease or relieve their suffering. Mohammed is a 2.5-year-old child with acute leukemia. He is the youngest of 3 children and lives in the densely populated Saddam City section of Baghdad. Shortly before the war, he was treated with chemotherapy and went into complete remission. As a consequence of the UN embargo on medicine, Mohammed's physicians have not been able to treat him for a number of months. His disease is now in relapse, and unless he receives treatment, he will surely die. Leukemia is the most common childhood malignancy in Iraq. The medical team examined many leukemic children who were unable to receive treatment because medicine was prevented from entering the country. Dr. William Lapira is a cancer specialist at the State University of New York at Stony Brook.
Many childhood cancers are curable today, and most respond quite well to modern treatment regimens. Over the last several years, Iraq has developed a number of sophisticated medical facilities for the treatment of childhood cancers, staffed by skilled physicians trained both in the United States and in England. I was quite shocked by what I saw on the cancer wards in Baghdad. Children with abdominal tumors were dying because simple surgical procedures could not be performed since the operating rooms had no anesthesia. Other children had tumors curable with chemotherapy, but because of the embargo, no drugs were available. Worst of all, we examined many children who were in intractable pain from advanced cancer who were not receiving any pain medication. We went through all the pharmacies in the hospitals in Baghdad and could not find one single ampule of morphine.
Since August 1990, the food supplies in Iraq have become severely depleted. Before the war, Iraq purchased 70% of its food from abroad at a price of $2.5 billion annually. But the UN embargo abruptly cut off that source. Iraq must now rely on its own food production. Farmlands and irrigation systems have been decimated by the Allied bombing. Seed supplies, fertilizers, and insecticides cannot be purchased from abroad. The lack of infant formula has put considerable stress on families who cannot buy alternative foods for their children and upon mothers who cannot breastfeed. Before the war, the Iraqi government supplied each child with 10 cans of infant formula per month. Since the embargo, only 2 cans per month are available. Mothers dilute this formula, often with contaminated water, resulting in a diet unable to supply sufficient protein, vitamins, or calories to sustain a child.
But there's no doubt whatever that the already meager food stores of Iraq, the public food stores from which the daily rations are drawn for the people, are running out.